Hello there, this is Cookies, and today I wanted to go over a sort of post-game national overview for Naba that I recently played in the slowest blitz with. Now, in the pregame one, we kind of did the basic national overview, went over some of the units, some of my theories for the units. I don't I don't think my views on some of the units have really changed that much, but I wanted to go over some of my discoveries throughout the course of this game. One of my goals this game was to make it into the late game and see what late game Naba could look like. And I feel like we got to get to the late game, but we didn't really get to experience the late game because Cataclysm happened. But I do think I don't know. I have some preferences coming out of this particular game, and I don't know if other people would agree with them, but I wanted to kind of go over them. So I know in this particular game, I did make some mistakes. I had no proper, I think, mid-game war. Probably should have invaded Abyssia, but I didn't. I was a little passive about neighbors accumulating power, like Vanarus, and I accumulated a lot of upkeep on blood mages trying to spin up the blood economy. So I probably got too many Gula. They cost upkeep. And probably not enough Shaitan, where the Shaitan could have taken over more of the blood hunting duties. And maybe I could have turned off Garnet production as a result of that and saved some money that way. Some things I did well. I think I did a pretty good job pouncing on weaker positions and getting them, I guess, like helping those players out of the game while simultaneously helping my own position. So I did do an okay job trying to keep pace. Let's see, give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Um, wanted to, I had some fans going, so I wanted to shut the door. Um, let's see. So yeah, I think I did do pretty well. I went ahead and pounced on Jotunheim, pounced on Banderlog, invaded Agartha. I think the only miss was I should have also invaded Abyssia, and that was after their scales had taken a toll. But for a few mostly out of game reasons, I decided not to invade Abyssia. So we'd been pretty friendly the whole game. He had opted not to run his helpless into me right off the bat. Uh, and we had done a whole bunch of trades. We split Eternal Pyre, so we were working together a lot. So for many of those reasons, I didn't want to fight him. Another thing I probably could have done was I probably could have tried to organize a coalition on either Vanarus or Pyrene. I think I was too obsessed trying to maintain the sort of power dynamic between those two. I was hoping they would fight a war, but I probably should have tried to just knock one of them down, and then hopefully we would have had time to deal with the other. So maybe doing a coalition on Vanarus and then Pyrene, and by then I think I probably would have been strong enough to handle a coalition, maybe. By saving the big blood power of Pyrene for a little bit later. I think that would have been a good play. But in terms of the nation itself, I think it's a really strong nation. I like the fact that almost everything in the nation is useful at least some point in the game, except maybe these Naba soldiers and light infantry. Not entirely sure what you would do with them. I guess you can use them to filter in behind Avites, but I felt like I really rarely had the money or the desire to recruit these. especially since your mages are evocation based, and if they miss an evocation, they're going to delete a bunch of these little infantry. They just don't seem quite up to snuff to the rest of the roster. I don't think I really recruited these, but everything else I found some sort of use for, at least in some part of the game. So Hermit Sahir are great, especially earlier in the game before you transition into Sahir. They allow you to foreign wreck mages all over the place, and you can spin up research very quickly with them before forts come online, and you can convert those labs into forts even. Malika are great. Sahir are great. They're sacred as well. They've got giant HP. You've got Janimir, phenomenal generals, can potentially do some thugging. And then you've got Mukarib, great communion mages, banishment communions, smite communions. And then Karib can lead around stealthy raiding parties. You can put earth boots on them and do all sorts of Earth 3 things. So, yeah, found uses for all these guys. These guys are tax collectors. They can do the raid command with camels. So, the roster is very strong. Love the roster. In terms of thinking about the early game, I really like leaning on the sacreds and the camels. The camels do a great job raiding. I played around a lot with attack scripts rather than fire and keep distance. And I think for anything with medium, or maybe not medium armor, but anything with heavy armor, you definitely want to do an attack script. Because what you've got here with these falcons is you have a free harassment bonus, and you've got something that distracts enemy attacks. And I think a lot of the time, if you put them on fire, you're trading that harassment, those distracted attacks, for the opportunity to do a 13 damage bow. And a lot of the time, the arrows are going to kill the falcons. And so using the 17 damage scimitar, coming in with even with the little hoof attack, if you go on an attack script, you get to leverage all those attacks while they're still potentially trying to fight the falcons. And not only that, but if you have extra ranks of camels right behind that initial rank that's fighting, they're still gonna fire extremely, like normally they have 8 precision, but if they're only 2 squares away, it's still going to be pretty good precision. So for instance, maybe I can pull up the battle. Give me 1 second. All right, so to kind of demonstrate that, I wanted to go back to this battle against Jotunheim. Now I had a large material advantage here, but these Thrym's Herdings have pretty high protection. They're not typically going to get damaged by archery, so fire and keep distance probably wouldn't work great on them. And what I wanted to really do was disrupt the Sabbath. Now I had already done that in the magic phase, but I wanted probably a second way to try and guarantee its demise if I could. And so we see the camels coming in on the flanks here. Now the falcons are all around here distracting, and the falcons have a pretty cool dive attack. So it's almost like their own little lance, if you will. But what we did here was we put our archers, so even while they're still fighting all these falcons and getting harassed, so for instance, this guy has a harassment penalty. There's 5 falcons on him. What we're also doing is we're leveraging the scimitars to go with all the falcons. And we're trying to take advantage of very high precision archery. So, like, this guy's normally not going to get killed by archery. He's enlarged. He's got 43 hit points. But if you come in and wallop him with scimitars, he's going to die pretty quickly. Not only that, but now we've cut off their retreat as well. And this is on a different patch, so it's behaving a little bit differently than it did before. But you can see all this high precision archery straight into the mage line because we bothered to get close to it. Now, there's definitely cases where this can backfire on you, but it's typically pretty rare where I care so much about preserving these units. Yes, they're expensive, but they also have a fair amount of upkeep. You're talking 18 gold a year for the full camel rider. So you're paying over a gold per turn, so you want to get them in there. And treating them, if you're going to treat them like a short bow, then why not just buy a short bow? Why would you buy a guy on a camel and do all this stuff? You could get 3 desert warriors for the price of this guy. So I think this works a little bit better for fully utilizing their kit by getting into melee. So that's kind of my feeling on the camels. I know a lot of people disagree, but for fighting armored targets, I think it makes a lot of sense. If you're doing something like barbarians, sure, just shoot away, but a lot of the time, especially stuff with shields, it just seems a lot more effective to put the archery right there on the front lines and combine it with scimitar, hoof attacks, the falcons, and just really overwhelm an opponent. And put their commanders in danger too. So that's kind of my feeling on the camels. For the sacreds, I think the conventional wisdom is still pretty strong. You don't want to overbless these guys. If you wanted, you could probably do some sort of shock resistance bless, so it's easier to do Wrathful Skies traps. But I don't think it's necessarily required either. If you manage to get an okay air gem income, you can summon Hin. And let me go pull them up. Okay, so I've got a turn later in the game. So you can summon Hin, and Hin have 15 shock resistance. And honestly, summoning them reasonably early in the game can be pretty nice too. They come on, well, you're only going to get them at Conjuration 6. It'd be nice if they were earlier in the tree. But what's nice about Hin is, in my opinion, they're generally always useful. Now, you do want to be a little bit careful about them. They have a heat aura. They will burn mages like Karib or even Hermit Sahir. So you do want to be a little bit careful about that. But they've got Stealthy 40 and they're ethereal. So you can use them for blood hunting, patrolling during peacetime, but during wartime, you can use them for Wrathful Skies traps, and you can use them to clear the wall guards on forts. So I forget if we stormed this turn. We didn't. But they make, because they can just ethereal their way right into the wall archers, they provide another option for clearing the wall guards besides putting mages in danger doing evocation spam. Now, your mages do have a lot of air magic and ethereal magic, so you can do a lot of things to minimize that kind of danger. But it is another nice option, especially since they can help push past the walls as well. So I do like Hin. I think they did Heat Aura a couple of my mages to death throughout this game. But if I had more air income throughout most of the game, I think I would have gotten more of them. They're just really solid troops, in my opinion. In terms of like a summon, like a dog summon. All right. So we've got Sacreds. we've talked about sacreds a little bit. We've talked about camels. In terms of the early game, I do really like the rating options that you get with Carib. So for instance, one of these guys, I think he can effectively lead and bless. I'd give him like 10 sacreds if you want to do a rating up with a Carib. If it's not sacreds, then I think you would just lead with a shake because you can do the deep rating, you get the tax collector option, and you might even combine the two anyways, just in case the Carib gets pegged by an archer or something. So you do have some really nice rating potential even early in the game on the cheap. You don't have to use Malika for this. You don't have to use Fancy or Gen. You can save them for more specialty utility purposes or thugging or better casting or elementals, whatever you want to do. I think Crib do a great job at doing that very basic job of stealthy rating and blessing your sacreds. And considering they're also your research monkeys, you might have a fair number of them. The other research monkey is the Mukarib, and I really like the Mukarib. They have fortune teller, so stacking them up in forts can be nice. They give you communion potential. You can power astral random Malika off of them, which is really nice. If I go find Naba, so you're gonna have some number of astral Malika, probably not very many, but and the Mukrib will also shield those astral random Malika from Magic Duel. Not completely, they're still kind of expensive at 170 gold, but it's typically a desperation play to Magic Duel. It's a lose-lose. So the person Magic Dueling is probably going to lose a bunch of mages, and the person being Magic Dueled is going to lose a bunch of mages. And that's not the kind of army play that's going to win you games. It's just going to make sure that you and someone else won't win the game. So I don't think it's quite as common as people sometimes make it out to be, unless they've got very cheap mages. But even then, you're still blowing a lot of mage turns to do it. So you'd probably want foreign recruit cheap mages, and I don't know how often you're really gonna have to worry about that. But for 170 gold, Mukra are nice. They can provide a little bit of shielding to an astral random Malika. The Malika can add a lot of magic diversity to the army off of a Mukarib communion. I would try to include extra Mukarib. You don't want to make it too easy for someone to do like 2 magic duels and blow up your whole communion, but just by unbalancing it, or maybe a volley of arrows, having it do that, but having a few extra Mukarib should be doable. And fairly early in the game, as soon as you run down Thumb a little bit, it does open up the option to soul slay annoying targets. So if you have a Mukarib communion, maybe you have a nice smite, and then you add soul slay or paralyze to that, it's going to be a lot harder to thug into your armies or to do some sort of like cheeky trap. It's not, it wouldn't necessarily stop something like Winds of Death, but it could stop something like Earthquake, or it could stop something like Firestorm. So having a contingent of Mukarib in an army is generally pretty nice. In terms of the, I guess, like mid game heading into late game army mages, you can kind of see it here. I think army thugging is something you should do on a Ba. I've got a fair number here, probably more than what I would normally field because we were fighting into Agarthan statues. But I don't think it takes a lot to create at least minimally effective thugs on Naba. So for instance, this guy, I give him a bottle and he's got a gate cleaver so he can branch off from the main army if he wants, and he doesn't need someone to bless him. Um, you can bring in Shaitan. Barkskin amulets are, I typically view them as free protection on a lot of Naban mages. You have so much fire resistance that the Barkskin amulet's not really going to hurt, and you can add that in and just boost your protection a little bit, and any little indie Nature 1 mage can forge those for you. And you can do like a Sahir setup. So I've got a Fire Force Sahir here. He's got a Fire in a Jar, Skull of Fire, Earth Boots. He can do all sorts of stuff just with this sort of kit. And ideally, you'd probably split these two over two Sahir. Um, I was always kind of chronically short on Sahir this game, as I was spending a lot of upkeep on Garnets. You can kind of see here. So I've got 444 upkeep on Garnets, whereas they're labeled as Sahara. I just don't have very many of them. I've only got 20 Shaitan, probably too many Gula. Yeah, only 6 Sahara, but I've got 36 Malika. So I'm spending a lot of Malika as well. So you can see an example here of an Astral Random Malika. You can throw some gems on her, give her an interesting kit. And so she's joining a communion and then doing Soaring Army and Arrowfend. So yeah, I don't know, you definitely have a lot of options. I think the community is fairly well versed in all the things you can do with probably Sahir and Malika. And that, I think they provide a great base for a mid-game army. And then as you roll into the late game, you probably want to start transitioning more into summons that don't cost upkeep. So you might have Shaitan, you might have stolen mages like this Oracle of the Ancients. You might have maybe an Archdevil like I've got here, although he's on that game, but he could do high fire magic. And you've got a free, who I think make great thugs, but you can also use them for evocations if you really want. So you can get Jin. You've got a large variety of summons that you can do your casting from to lower the upkeep of fielding an army. Additionally, you can break into summoning demons. So you can see all the demons that we've got here. We've got, I don't know, 89 storm demons here. You can certainly expand your roster, field a bunch of serpent fiends, storm demons. I think serpent fiends you want to try to avoid, but I was desperate for patrol chaff. They're not especially great. They can do okay doing some counter thugging because I believe they have a death poison. Yeah. But it's kind of hard unless you buff their strength. It can be hard for them to do damage to thugs, so they can struggle a little bit. You've also got Merid for late game magic, so you can get high fire, air, and water out of Merid. You've got glamour summons, so you can cover a lot of magic without paying upkeep. I believe you don't pay upkeep for the Merid. I'd hope not. Yeah. So I think you've got a lot of avenues for heading into the late game, building, uh, being able to get access to whatever you need, as long as you have a reasonable gem income. A lot of flexibility. I think Naba has it's a very high quality roster, but it also has a lot of flexibility. Something you can do in the mid game is that I didn't do in this game, but it's you you can hire hundreds of these little desert warriors, and you can put the new poison arrow buffs on them. You can put the fire arrow buffs on them, and just drown the enemy in archery. So you can do that. It is a short bow. It does a little less damage than the composite bow, but you can get, again, you can get 3 of these. So you've got options there. Also in the mid game, you can start bringing out the army thugs. Really cheap gear. You can put them on gen. I wonder if I have a gen somewhere. So like this guy, he's got a pretty good stat line. You can give him a weapon, and then you can probably throw some sort of armor on him if you want, and he can make a pretty good thug. He's got some paths for buffing himself. You can even fluff him with like a Mukarib. You can fluff Body Ethereal on him. And the Mukarib can also help bless him, because I don't think this guy can bless himself. Yeah. So you have a lot of thugging options uh, to for army thugs. You can see, what's it? I've got a Janamir here with a GSS. I've got, even my prophet has a magic weapon. I've got the Safri. And some of these guys aren't going to be, for instance, I don't know if this guy, because he's not unseen, I don't think he gets the salt vulnerability like this guy does. So even if your opponent is playing with salt, so like they're building this item, you can still get around that. Like you're gonna have to be careful using Shaitan or Freet if they do that, or even Gen, but you still have Janamir, who are only half Gen, and they're not gonna have the same sort of issue. They have some self buffing paths for thugging as well. So you have a lot of chassis for army thugs, and you can kind of cater them to your opponent and what they're doing, which is really nice. Um, you've got Sabbaths and communions, so you've got your Shaitan, you've got Mukarib. So now you don't necessarily have the cross path unless you empower an astral mage and blood, and then you can start doing some of those shenanigans. But you could potentially still, with a couple of Shaitan, you could do a pain transfer Sabbath and do a whole bunch of air or fire elementals if you need to. So, and that, I mean, that should come online in the mid game. And then you have a whole variety pack of, I guess, like magic phase traps you can do. So, for instance, if you're patrolling using a Carib, just let's say it's just one Carib, and you put a bunch of hen on that Carib, it's going to, I believe in the scouting report for the opposing player, it's going to look like 15 Mukarib. And they might decide that they want a magic phase on that and try to kill that. But they don't know it's only one Mukarib. And you could have other stealthy stuff there as well. And then you could decide to patrol that. And you can play a pretty nasty trap for an opposing thug or an opposing, like, Rouse Hunger or Call to the Wild, or maybe they try some sort of other fancy magic phase stuff. You can set all sorts of misdirection traps in that way by taking advantage of scouting reports. All your mages, I think, except Mukarib and a few of the other mages also don't have stealthy. I think Marid aren't stealthy for some reason. But generally speaking, most of your mages are stealthy. So if your opponent puts a fort under siege, you can stealth new mages in, as long as they haven't cracked it on the first turn. Or you can stealth mages out and evacuate a fort. That's really nice for preserving combat power if you get outmaneuvered. You can hide your army, so Veil Army is a very powerful mechanic. I believe I made a video on that in this series, but it'll hide even from scrying. So if somebody's scrying on your fort or they're scrying on your army trying to determine what's in it, you can hide the entire army if you wanted to, if you just have a few Malika stealthed underneath it. So you've got some options for that. Another interesting thing, now you're playing percentages here, but if you have a very important thug, like a Merid, and he's raiding somewhere, let's say you're using him as an SC rather than a combat caster, which I think is probably the better role for him, you can follow underneath that Merid with an Astral Random Malika as well. And that can help protect that Merid from Magic Tool. So you can do a few things like that, or you could try to make a Shade Mail. I think there's a couple of other items that give stealth now as well. So there's the Shade Mail Hauberk, there's the one that turns him into a spy as well. You maybe put that on a McRib and try to protect that thug or that raiding group from um, sort of magic phase, either was it Mind Hunt, or yeah, sorry, not Magic Duel, Mind Hunt, or you can try to provide some additional help if they get magic phased on. Another thing you can do that's pretty cool is if you put the boosters on, say, a Malika like this, to be able to project self. Forget. Yeah, so you'd need a glamour booster. But and you're rolling against the dice, but you can use project self over a province, and if somebody tries to magic tool, or not magic tool, mind hunt the province, depending on which spell got casted first, you might be able to block that mind hunt through the project self in the magic phase, and then the projection will go away, but while it's there, it can help protect from mind hunt. So it's kind of like a 50-50. So if you don't want to risk the Malika herself, you can spend a few glamour gems and have, it's a more iffy interaction, but it could still help protect. Another option you have that I did use a lot of in this game is you can do Infernal Prison. You do have the Fire Blood cross path. So down here in Blood 8, you've got Infernal Prison. So with a Bloodthorn, any Shaitan can move towards the front of an army and just Infernal Prison something, send it to hell. That can work reasonably well if there's not like a whole army around it. We saw that where I had a few casts of that, and I think they hit mostly wall troops. But you could also use some range boosters, and maybe they would target higher HP targets with that. I didn't have a lot of range boosters, but you could certainly make some, especially if I'd had more astral income. So, and I think Pyrene made some great use of this in this campaign as well. That Fire Blood crosspath for getting rid of a lot of the Olmish Tartarians. So, I guess we're over here. So that you've got a tremendous number of tools, and the toolkit only gets larger as you go into the late game. It's really quite impressive. You can normally you don't get to control quite that much what your opponent sees of you, but you can manipulate everything that they see about you. So for instance, in this game, I wanted to hide the fact that I had garnets and that I had an extremely large blood economy. But you could hide other things as well. You could hide how you're doing your raiding game so they only see what attacks them. You could hide troop movements, reinforcements. You you really can hide all sorts of stuff with Veil Army. There's a few different ways to buff or add additional Veil Army. I think there was 3 different items. So you've got these cauldrons, you've got these gossamer claws, which are quite expensive. And you've got the glamour booster, which you can also do. That also adds Veil Army. So you can add, I think, up to 125 Veil Army to a Malika, and then she can cover 175 units in a province, including commanders. And given the amount of stealth that you have on the nation as well, there's no reason for your opponent to ever see what's about to hit them unless they're religiously pinging everything every turn. So you have a lot of leeway for surprising your opponents. They shouldn't be seeing stuff in scouting reports, and you should be able to really take advantage of opponents' lack of information. Um, yeah, so I think that's a lot of it that I wanted to talk about. I guess something else I could talk about is the gen blocks. And chatting with Kirby a little bit on it, um, I think we both kind of are okay with the idea of summoning a gem block inside of a fort. So in Dominions 5, I think it was popular to leave the gem blocks out in the open, and it was seen as sort of a raid defense. But it's a very predictable raid defense. It does increase the cost of raiding that province, but if they bring the right toolkit, like a Shattercaster or I'm forgetting the name of it, a Smasher, then they can just waltz right through it. But if you put a couple of gem blocks in a fort, what that lets you do is it increase the cost of storming the fort. So it forces them to have some sort of tool that can deal with a gem block when they go to storm the fort. And you should get time to reinforce that gem block. They shouldn't be able to magic phase the gem block. And so what that can let you do is set up protections for that gem block, where the goal of that storm defense is just to prevent things that can kill the gem block from getting to the gem block. And then if a bunch of normal infantry try to storm the fort, they might succeed against everything else except the gen block. And if they rout, then you keep the fort. And it can be a very expensive loss for your opponent to lose a bunch of basic infantry that way. So you can fluff that gem block. You can add additional mages around the gem block. You can use the gem block as a way to hold up the enemy while other mages behind the gem block cast evocations. So I think there's a lot of pros to running the gem block inside of the fort. I didn't have any forts stormed this game, but it would be interesting to see what you could do with a gem block inside of a fort. And I think there's some opportunities there for making your forts extremely difficult to storm. And not only that, but you can summon them sort of just in time. I mean, if you want to script it, then you got to summon it at least one, like a turn before the fort gets cracked. But if somebody is about to declare war on you and they're relying on just hordes of infantry, then you could potentially summon a few gem block inside of a fort just after they've already put it under siege. And if they aren't scrying the fort, they might not be prepared for it. And not everyone pings inside of forts, because pinging takes a turn, and time can be turns in time, like the time for an army can be extremely valuable. So, and even if they ping the fort, I mean, that gives you another turn to move more reinforcements in. You could summon more gen blocks. You could force them, you could give them pause. They might delay because of the gen block, and they might wait for some new tool to arrive to be able to handle the gen block. So I really do like the idea of putting gen blocks inside of forts. So that's something else I've been thinking about a little bit. You can put a Skull of Fire on a gem block and make it fire too, or you can give it fire gems and to be able to do Phoenix power, and you can give it a fire in a jar, and then maybe you can do a fire elemental as well. So there's a surprising amount of flexibility in a gem block, and then when you're not really using it for anything, you stick a quill on it. So just an interesting way to augment. I mean, you can use them to augment your PD, but you can also use them to augment your fort defenses. So, and I guess another small downside of putting them as fort PD is it lets your opponents know where your unforted labs are, which, in my opinion, earlier in the game is an unnecessary amount of information to give your opponents. I mean, after they found it, sure, you could go ahead and throw down a gem block and maybe they'll magic phase on it. But chances are they might see it and they'll be able to adapt to it. Let's see. Was there anything else I kind of wanted to cover in terms of like lessons learned? When you're considering a build for Naba, something that I didn't do that I think would have helped me a lot is consider taking air and blood on your pretender in a cross pathway such that you can create a robe of the magi at some point, and that'll help you break into the high end of a lot of other paths, at least in a guaranteed fashion at some point in the game. But also having high air and high blood will help you break into paths that I think are essential for really unlocking Naba's true power going into the late game. And I think it's essential that you've broken into those. So you really do want to. I would strongly consider taking air and blood on a pretender. I'm sure there's many builds. Naba's a very flexible nation, but I think there's huge pluses for that. Also, when you're considering a build for Naba, I do think you want to consider your money situation. While you do have a lot of sacred troops and a lot of summons, Naba's a very gold hungry nation. You're going to want a lot of gold. You have giant forts, they cost a lot of gold. You have Malika, they're 675 gold. For instance, if I want to build a fort with this guy, it's 1,000 gold in 5 months. So there's a lot of expenses that you have on the nation. A Sahir is 475, a Janimir is 420. There's, you know, your stuff is not cheap. Your basic frontline infantry are typically at least 25 gold, all the way up to 40, and your raiders are 23 gold. So do consider taking some OK scales. Another thing to consider is, unless they've patched it recently, is you might want to only take heat 2. And that's so in the summer you don't get population penalties for being in a wasteland and having a large population, which can be pretty annoying because it's your capital. You'd think they know how to live in a desert, but you still get wasteland penalties. Presumably because most of your people still need to eat and drink, like your Jan. So it's I don't know. It can be annoying, but it does give you a scale that you can dump slightly. you'll still get that income back in the summer. And for instance, yeah, so it prefers heat scale too. So if you set your heat to heat 1, for instance, you'll only lose a little bit of income. And yes, your firepower stuff will be a little bit weaker stats wise, but I mean, I guess there's some debate whether or not you really want to preserve your capital population that much. But I'm getting 630 gold per turn here on Heat 2. So I wonder, if I had 40,000 population, if that wouldn't be like close to 700. And that could be pretty valuable. So just something to consider. I mean, you do have firepower units, you do have a lot of fire magic you want to cast, so perfectly understandable to keep the high heat, but just something to consider that you might want to think about is how hot you're going to get in the summer, and you definitely might not want to be turning other provinces into wastelands by being too hot. So, all right. So I think that's a lot of it. Yeah, so you can see the firepower on this guy and the magic power. So two scales that you tend to want are heat and magic, but heat can play into your income a little bit, um, both in a pro way because you're heat scale too, and both because of the population of provinces might not like being heat 2 or heat 3 in the summer. You do have the site. You have the Great Dam to offset things a little bit by going more into growth. But I don't know. It's just something to think about, especially if you find some really nice provinces. Uh, Something like this. If there's no Well of Misery up, this would only be growth 2. And which I think would make it 0.4. So I don't know. But yeah, you do want a lot of money, but you also want to have good stats in your thugs. So up to you. I think I prioritize stats on thugs. It's probably fine in this game. And yeah, I think that's a lot of what I wanted to cover for this particular sort of post game. Um, Overall, I think Naba's a very strong nation. I think they're a really fun nation. You get a lot of flexibility. Um, you can have a lot of fun kind of manipulating what people see about you and what your intentions are. And because of that, you can, to some extent, set your own narrative, which can be really strong in diplomacy and is something I like. So, yeah, hope you give Naba a try, and I hope you enjoy them. And let me know if there's any tips or tricks I forgot about or any build concepts that you really liked. And hopefully, I'll see you guys in a game someday. Have a good one. Bye.